Boundaries. As we journey deeper into ourselves and our understanding of our inner world, it becomes necessary to examine our relationship with the world around us. How do we show up? How do we behave? How do we treat others? And what are we teaching others about us? It becomes increasingly important to learn to communicate our needs and desires in these healthy and loving ways. It becomes more and more important to learn how and when to set appropriate boundaries. This is vital for our process of self-discovery, self-love, and growth. And setting boundaries is a part of taking responsibility for ourselves and our relationship with others and with the world. A boundary is a protective layer that keeps me from becoming resentful at a later moment. Boundaries can be physical, emotional, or energetic. They are like a fence, but they're invisible and they're internal. You can place them with yourself and you can share them with others as well. So, like I said, there are three types of boundaries: physical, emotional, and energetic. I mean, probably more, but I work with these three. Physical boundaries are the boundaries that we're the most acquainted with: borders and fences and walls, etc. We can see them, we can touch them. These boundaries can be very clear and they can be very obvious. Take the fence of a house, for example. It denotes what is public property, the sidewalk, the road, and what's private property, the garden, the garage, the house. If you cross the fence, the boundary, without being invited, you're trespassing. And there can be really serious consequences for this. Sometimes the police may even be involved, or you might have to pay a fine. Now, boundaries like these, they're very obvious. They're very clear to see. But physical boundaries, they are also our body, our space. And yet this type of boundary feels a lot less obvious, and it's a lot harder to uphold it. It's not okay for another person to touch us if we haven't given our consent. Now, our body is our property, and it should be respected as such. But I want you for a moment to think about children and their bodies. Children are, up until a certain age, completely dependent upon adults, upon others. They can't feed themselves, they can't change themselves. And as they grow older, they become more and more autonomous and more independent. But sometimes adults seem to forget that just because a child is little and was once dependent on them, that it's okay to violate their boundaries. I know that's a really strong word, but I use it on purpose. So they might stroke their hair or try to hold them, and the child may push them away and even say no. The child is being forced to set a very obvious limit because the adult has forgotten that a little person is also a person, and the adult didn't check in. As an adult, would you go and stroke another adult's hair without knowing that it was welcome? Now, with children, we really should be looking at the nonverbal cues, such as turning away or hesitation or, big eyes and a lack of a smile if they're observing and trying to read you. If a child's boundaries were constantly being crossed, maybe this is you or someone you know, they may grow up to be adults that struggle to place boundaries with others. When they said no, it was overruled. And as adults, it then becomes difficult to say no. If they were not encouraged to feel that their body was their own property, now I'm talking about this, but this couldn't apply to their energy and their emotional boundaries as well. But if their body as their property was not taught and encouraged this way, they will struggle with physical boundaries when they get older. They may become people pleasers or pushovers, and they may also end up saying yes to or putting up with physical and sexual advances and activity because they don't believe that they have a right to say no. Their no and their needs were ignored in the past. Why would it be any different now? Now, emotional boundaries are slightly more complex to understand as they are totally invisible and they're a lot more abstract. Where the line is drawn can be a bit more obscure and difficult to understand than simply seeing and respecting a physical wall or fence or even a body, actually. So emotional boundaries, they exist to keep us feeling safe and happy and secure and healthy, at peace, etc. We place emotional boundaries to protect our emotional and our inner world. So our feelings, our energy, and our relationships. We communicate our emotional boundaries to other people, but it's so important that we ourselves understand our own emotional boundaries and that we honor them, as well as understand and honor those of other people. Stating an emotional boundary could be saying something like, please don't refer to me as dumb, as I find it hurtful, or if we're going to date, I need us to share more about our feelings with each other to feel connected with you. Or every time you're late, I feel like my time doesn't matter to you. Please be on time. So on. These are just a few examples. While we can share our emotional boundaries with other people, it's also important that we respect our own boundaries. It's even more important. So, do you go back for seconds after you've said that you would stop eating? Or do you text your ex or that person, even though doing so will only extend your healing process by ripping open a healing wound? Do you have sex with someone even though you didn't really want to, or before you're ready? Or do you end up helping someone even though you had originally said that you wouldn't, because you then felt guilty? These are all examples of how you cross your own boundaries. And it's very important to really understand and see how there is my own boundaries, and then there's also what I share with you about my boundaries. But I'll get to that. Finally, we have the energetic boundaries. Energetic boundaries are the most abstract type of boundary because they're not so much connected to emotions and behavior or anything physical. They refer to the truly intangible things, the energy between us. So, have you ever been in a situation or spent time with a person that for no apparent reason left you feeling completely drained or exhausted or grumpy after your interaction? This is because you were giving them your energy, your life force, knowingly or unknowingly. They were pulling your energy like an energy vampire feeding off of you. So this can also happen with concepts, and it can also happen with things. So the news is a really good example of something that drains our energy and can leave us feeling deflated or anxious or even miserable. Watching too much bad TV or negative news can have that effect on us. So energetic boundaries are not something that we can share with other people. It's up to us to understand and to place our energetic boundary around us to keep us healthy and safe from the world. When you feel your energy dropping, you must identify what is sucking your energy and the energy leak and know how to stop it and or how to draw your energy back into yourself. So there are a few layers to understanding what boundaries are and how to deal with them. So most people tend to jump to they crossed my boundary conclusion first. But I really want you to understand that while this may absolutely be true, it is also the most superficial one and the one that is the hardest to control. Because as we know, it's impossible to control other people. You can state your boundaries very clearly to another person. You can ask to clarify whether or not they've understood it. You can even tell them about the consequences of them not respecting your boundary, and they may still choose to ignore it. So the most superficial boundary is that of you respecting me, you respecting my boundary. Because as I said, you may choose to not respect my boundary. And then what? Should I suffer because of this? I mean, many people do. They give up their power and they put the responsibility on the other person. That's how a lot of people live. Now, the layer underneath that is what really matters, in my opinion. It's whether or not I respect and hold my own boundary. Do I put myself in situations that are not good for me? Do I allow other people to treat me badly? Do I accept less than what I am worth and desire? Am I responsible for my needs being met? I am responsible for my feelings and for my experience, and therefore I am responsible for honoring my boundaries. Even if you don't, especially if you don't, then I need to communicate more or I need to remove myself. Boundaries are a loving layer of protection to keep me safe. The outer layer is the layer that I share with you, and I hope that you will respect. But the inner layer is the layer that I am responsible for upholding, especially if you don't honor that outer layer. So if someone crosses your boundary, it's really easy to point your finger at them and blame them. I mean, it is, I know that. And while it may also be true, what does it get you? I mean, nothing that you can truly use. Self-righteousness, sure, but what does it actually get you? So instead, you must look into yourself and ask, how did I participate in this? How did I allow this to happen? What is my role here? What's my learning? It's never about the other person. I mean, yes, there are cases where there truly is a violation. But of course, I'm not talking about those cases. I'm talking about the places where you stopped being fully responsible for yourself, the sovereignty, and you put the responsibility of your well-being and your happiness on another person. Ultimately, your needs, your feelings, and your experiences are your responsibility. This is the most important piece to understand about boundary work. My boundaries, my needs are my responsibility. Stating my boundary or you crossing it is only 10% of boundary work, but honoring my own boundary is 90% of it. Honoring myself and my needs and desires is the real work. It's the only thing that we can actually control. So finally, there is the matter of respecting another person's boundaries. We are so good at making a fuss when someone crosses our boundaries. And yet, we may actually really struggle to honor and respect another person's boundary. It can be really difficult to hear a no from another person or some version of no without taking it personally or seeing it as some form of rejection. So if you struggle with receiving a no, chances are you're probably also struggling with giving the no. So that's also something to look at. Maybe you worry that the other person may feel rejected, or you project what you experience internally when you receive a no onto the other person. Or maybe you tend to want to control other people when you don't get what you want. So I want you to observe yourself and your reactions when other people share a boundary with you, because it's going to tell you a lot about yourself. How open and willing to receive it are you? How respectful and loving are you? Because that will also reflect how you treat your own boundaries. In these moments, we forget that the other person is just merely placing a loving layer of protection around themselves to keep the connection clean and healthy, just as you do when you place and you uphold a boundary with other people and with the world. So I like to think of boundaries like this permeable layer. Some things can come in while other things are just too big to actually pass through. So I use the energy of a waterfall to think about my own boundaries. The waterfall can have this really gentle trickle of water, or it can be this heavy cascade where nothing can penetrate through. So I can adjust the strength of the water depending on the situation. Symbolically speaking, of course. Boundaries are these protective layers that are meant to keep in the good while keeping out the bad. But unfortunately, it often ends up being the other way around. So because we've been hurt and because we don't trust, we really struggle to allow the good to come in. And we end up just keeping everything out, having these hard protective walls around us. So maybe we don't know how to accept help from others, and we end up trying to do everything ourselves or on our own, eventually burning ourselves out, shutting completely off, or not being vulnerable with the world. Others, they have leaky boundaries and they allow everything in. Just take it all in. They feel everything. They have these bleeding hearts and they struggle with their own energy. Or maybe it's both as well. Sometimes these people, they overgive and they rescue others. And other times they're the ones who actually need to be rescued. They end up collapsing and they end up becoming dependent on others. Now it's this really fine line. This is the art between asking for help and becoming dependent on it. The most important thing is staying in integrity with ourselves. We know when we have given away our power. I mean, if we really feel into it, we know. Just like we know when we are being stubborn and when we are refusing to receive help. So boundaries are actually meant to be this semi-permeable layer, keeping out the bad, but allowing in the good. Now, there is so much discomfort and fear where boundaries are concerned. Boundaries are almost a taboo topic. Can I set limits and boundaries and say no and still be a loving person? I mean, many people actually believe that setting boundaries is unkind or selfish, and they end up saying yes and going along with way more than they actually want to. Setting boundaries limits and saying no is actually incredibly loving because it keeps the relationship healthy and it keeps it free of resentment. So when people know and they trust that you place boundaries and that you can take care of yourself, they know that they can ask you for something and they don't need to worry that you're going to say yes out of guilt or later on you're going to somehow want payback. They know that if you do say yes, it's because you truly want to, because you truly mean it. It feels good to them, feels safe. It's a safe and a secure relationship. Now, others, they may end up asking, what if somebody's upset or hurt by my boundary? I'm going to tell you that people will be upset by you placing boundaries if you've never done so before. Other people, they benefit from you not having boundaries. That's just the ugly truth. They're used to having a certain type of relationship with you. Maybe they get more from you than they give. And I mean, a true healthy boundary is not hurtful to others. It may upset their ego or an unhealthy codependent dynamic, but it's not hurtful or insulting to their essence. If they are upset by your boundaries, you have to ask yourself if they truly want what is best for you. Now, maybe you struggle with knowing what a legitimate boundary actually is. Like I said, boundaries are protective layers. They protect our time, our love, our energy, and our money. They keep us from becoming resentful at a future moment. Now, only you can know what a legitimate boundary is for you and what is your ego. Because your ego may place boundaries in the name of taking care of myself, protecting my energy and my heart, when in reality, what you're actually doing is keeping your ego from getting stirred up. I see this happen a lot when people start doing this. Only you can know the difference. Now, we may feel guilty when we set our boundaries, or we may even feel afraid. Maybe we're not totally clear on what our boundaries actually are, and we're just discovering them, or maybe we're worried that we're going to push people away. And so that way end up being alone. We've been conditioned to fear and feel guilty when setting boundaries and to sacrifice ourselves for others. But when you trust the connection, stay connected, and you're willing to communicate, most things can be solved. So the truth is that we are always teaching other people how to treat us. And we're also telling our subconscious what we believe ourselves to be worth and deserve. If we do not honor our own boundaries, how can we actually expect other people to honor them? So if we don't honor our boundaries and we don't communicate them, others can't know what they are. If we don't honor them and follow through on any consequences, others won't know that we actually mean it. So we're always teaching others how to treat us. Our actions, our energy, all of this, that's what really counts. And we're always sending messages to our subconscious about what we believe we deserve and what we believe that we're worth. And this is what becomes our reality. So be very, very aware of where you make exceptions when it comes to your boundaries and why. With others, with yourself, because it always boils down to you. Now, boundaries, they are very important and they're necessary when it comes to interacting with others. It's how we know what is ours and what is not, and how we show respect for ourselves and another and for our relationships. Boundaries are relevant in all areas of our life, our time, our love, our energy, our money, etc. So it's important that you know what your boundaries are and that you feel really comfortable in stating them with other people, but also honoring them. So in order to be able to place our boundaries, we must first know what they are. Boundaries, just like needs and desires, they are developed throughout life. I mean, thanks to all the experiences that we have, we're always learning. So we can have different boundaries with different people and in different situations. So for example, you may love that your partner is affectionate in the privacy of your home, but maybe you feel uncomfortable with displays of affection out in public. Or maybe you are happy for your partner to be rough with you in bed, just not after you've had a fight. So boundaries, they are constantly changing, they're fluid. It's up to you to do your best to stay on top of them and to communicate them to the world as you move through it, being present in every moment. Not everyone's going to have the same boundaries as you, or not everyone's even going to view the same world. Not everyone's going to view the world the same way as you, or share the same understanding of things as you. Right? This is where communication can get tricky. So it's up to you to communicate as clearly and lovingly as you can, and to keep making adjustments when it's needed. If someone does cross your boundary, don't just assume that it was intentional. Always try to communicate about what happened and explain what it is that you need. Our values and our boundaries are actually very closely connected to each other. So what we appreciate, value, and like will tell us something about what our boundaries are. just as the things that we dislike and judge also tell us. So often, when we get angry, it's because a value of ours has been hit. Our boundaries, they protect what we value and what we cherish. So if you struggle to identify your boundaries, you can actually look at what you value, what you give importance, and also what you dislike and what you judge. If we don't know our own boundaries, and if we don't own our no, we cannot fully own our yes. Because if you're not able to say no, then what good is your yes? People are going to doubt you if you're saying yes because you mean it or because you're not able to say otherwise, to say no. So for your yes to actually mean anything at all, to have any true value, you must be able to say and to own your no. Otherwise, you're not going to be trusted. So this also applies to telling the truth. If you don't tell the truth, you cannot be trusted. Being someone who sometimes tells the truth is as good as being somebody who never does. Because people won't know when you are telling the truth and when you're not. So when people know that you are truthful, even if it's difficult, especially when it's difficult, at least they know that they can trust you and they can trust what you're saying. Saying no becomes easier as our commitment to taking care of ourselves overrides the fear of being rejected or of not getting approval from others. It becomes easier because we realize that the only person whose approval we truly need is our own. It's part of making our own well-being our top priority. Saying yes because we don't feel able to say no is just another way of not taking care of ourselves, of not being responsible. So a lot of people, they avoid saying no or telling the truth because of the discomfort that will follow. How will my no be received? What will the consequences be? Will it be accepted or will I have to defend it? We squirm just by thinking about it and thinking about having to do it. So we end up, because we don't want the squirming, we end up avoiding it because we squirm when we think about it, we squirm as we're doing it, we squirm after having done it. So ultimately, a lot of people just find it easier not to do it, to sacrifice that. But in reality, the word no is one of the most loving words that exists. It makes it so clear to another where the line goes. It makes others feel safe and secure to be in your life when they know that there are boundaries. So this doesn't mean that your boundaries won't ever be tested. I mean, I often use the analogy of the harness on a roller coaster ride. Right? The first thing that every single person does when it comes down over you, the moment that they get strapped in, is what? They check to see if the harness is strapped in properly, if it's secure. Will this hold me? Now, people, especially children and teenagers, they're going to check and they're going to recheck and they're going to check again just to make sure that you've got them. They will test the boundaries to see how securely they're strapped in. And if you budge too much, they're going to unconsciously develop this sense that you can't be trusted, that they can push you. How far can you be pushed? They're going to want to see who's actually in control here. You're not. So it's so important that we are aware of our boundaries, that we communicate them, and that we honor them as they set the tone for our relationship with the world and with ourselves. Boundaries and communication are essential for safe and secure and healthy relationships. The gold standard when it comes to communication, safety, and boundaries can probably be experienced within the BDSM and the kink communities. So one definition of kink could be a set of pleasurable activities that people choose to do together that in other contexts are not pleasurable or usual. So BDSM stands for BD, bondage dominance, DS, dominant submission, and SM, sadism and masochism. So unusual or not, when engaging in any activity with others, it's important that everyone feels safe and secure. So the reason I highlight the kink and the BDSM community here is because when done right, and when honoring the practices and the protocols, and sadly, not everyone does this, they actually have the most beautiful, clean, and clear practices for relating and intimacy, physical, emotional, or energetic relating. So clear communication around boundaries and desires is coupled with radical self-responsibility. And this allows for a level of depth and presence and surrender and connection, which actually isn't seen elsewhere. So while kinky activities may or may not be you, I want you to feel into the energy, and I want you to understand that all activities, sexual, kinky, or not, actually boil down to the same thing: the movement of energy. It's all about energy, giving and receiving energy. In any moment, you are either the one giving or the one receiving. There's an energy exchange between you and the world that you interact with. And what is energy? Energy is power. Power. So when I work with my clients in the kink communities, I talk a lot about the importance of having a relationship with your power. Knowing yourself deeply, your needs, your fears, your desires, being able to communicate these and being able to take responsibility for yourself. You may choose to surrender to a dom, but before you do, it is your responsibility to know whether this dom is trustable, a dominant. Can they hold you? It's your responsibility to make sure to be discerning and to take care of yourself. Who you surrender to and when you do it. And to truly dominate another, you must first dominate yourself. You must first be able to dominate yourself, your life, and your world. Do you have the level of depth, of presence, and discipline that it requires to hold yourself strong and erect, to be that pole, the safety? This comes before even thinking about dominating another person. Can I dominate myself, my life? These concepts actually apply to you as well, even if you are not in the kink community. Most people, mostly feminine beings, or when you are in your feminine pole, yearn to surrender to life, to a partner, to source. But how can you surrender? Surrender your power if you've not fully claimed it to begin with. As a submissive or as a feminine being, how could you give up the control, the power, if you don't actually have a relationship with it? Because you cannot give away, you cannot give up something that you don't actually have. So this applies to the submissive role just as much as it applies to anyone who's yearning to release control and to surrender and to be ravished. This applies to anyone who has that desire. Whatever you want to call it or label it is irrelevant. Now, victim mentality is the idea that you are at the mercy of the world. And sadly, many people do not have and are not cultivating relationships with their power, their energy, their life force energy, meaning that they do end up feeling at the mercy of life. So the more that you cultivate a relationship with it, the more that you can actually play with it and play with others. This is where power play becomes hot and sexy. It's the polarity, the tension, the attraction. It's the leading versus surrendering. It's not abusive or controlling. You've made agreements and you feel safe and secure. This is where you can truly let go and surrender and experience what it is to be truly ravished and dissolve into this oblivion. And we crave this. Submissive or not, feminine beings crave and yearn for this experience, merging into one with life and with their partner, dissolving into sexual and sensual and energetic bliss and ecstasy. But many have not done the work to cultivate this energy within themselves first, to cultivate and honor the relationship with this energy, with their power, while simultaneously craving these experiences. So many actually end up in a trap of being seduced by pseudo-masculinity, leadership, and power. They fall for people who've not done the work to hold themselves, let alone hold another. Pseudo-power, abusive and toxic relationships, drama and more trauma. This is the danger of the self-proclaimed dominant or master. And this trend is also very, very clear outside of the kink world, hiding in plain sight. This is just talking about BDSM and kink here gives me a language that I can use, but these are concepts and energetic exchanges that we actually see in the entire world. People who are entitled and greedy and power hungry, who take without giving, who take without worrying about consequences of thinking about other people, who are not actually interested in others or in the world. They just want their own needs met. And they dangle this promise of connection and union and being taken care of in front of you. And people fall for it. So maybe you're the person dangling, or maybe you're the person falling for it. But we see this out in the world all the time. Empty and false promises, and people believing it. And people settling for breadcrumbs and less than satisfactory. So this is why cultivating a relationship with your power is so important. And taking radical responsibility for yourself, for your needs and your desires. Placing those boundaries, honoring them, communicating them, upholding them. Self-respect and self-responsibility is sexy, whether you're the one giving or receiving. Communication is necessary, and healthy boundaries are vital. So once you understand what boundaries are and know what yours are, it's about implementing them and then continuously checking in on them, because like I said, they will change. It's not something that you do once and that's it, work done. Boundaries, they need constant love and attending, like a garden. Our boundaries, they protect our emotional, physical, and energetic health, and that changes and fluctuates. So it's our responsibility to nurture these aspects of ourselves, and therefore checking in with yourself regularly is crucial. Awareness is key. The more aware you are, the easier it is to guarantee that your boundaries, they work for you. Being aware of your surroundings, being aware of your needs and your desires, being aware of any changing circumstances, ideally before any damage is done. Being aware of yourself, your fluctuating feelings, energy, and needs in any moment. I mean, it really is an art. So being able to tune into yourself and fully feel yourself is so important. That's why it's important to have done the work to clean up your system. Because what's fueled by fear and your suffering and your victim consciousness and your negative core beliefs, how are they impacting you? What are your true needs versus your negative beliefs and your trauma and your fear? Now, sadly, many people, they set boundaries from their trauma and not from a place of truth and from connection. So many people, they start doing this work and they confuse, for example, healthy discussions with being gaslit. It's important that you have done your inner work and understand that boundaries are love. Boundaries is another word for love. guaranteeing happy and healthy relationships and life. Boundaries are not an excuse to punish others or to push them away in the name of protecting myself. I mean, sometimes, yes, sometimes this is exactly what you must do. But self-responsibility means to know what is true action and when it's your trauma and it's your ego directing you. So it's true that only an unconscious person will try to use or manipulate others. But it's equally true that only an unconscious person can be used and manipulated. So it's perfectly possible to say no firmly and clearly to a person, or to walk away from a situation and to be in a state of complete inner non-resistance at the same time. When you say no to a person or a situation, let it come from insight and not from reaction, from a clear realization of what is right or not for you at that moment. This is what it means to give a high quality no. It's coming from a place of connection from your heart. Being present in the now, grounded in the present moment, is also the only way for us to feel what is true for us right now, in this moment. So very often our needs, they're going to change and they're going to fluctuate. So by tuning into ourselves and the present moment, we can feel what is true. From here, we can make the necessary adjustments rather than blindly react, again, from our old patterns based on our fear and our trauma. The other really important thing to highlight here and in this work is the word I've been using of adjustments, adjusting to the situation, adjusting your expectations, adjusting your words, adjusting your boundaries. We learn. From every experience that we have, we learn. And ideally, those learnings are implemented through what I refer to as adjustments. When relevant, of course, because sometimes it really isn't about adjusting anything, but instead it's about, like I said, leaving or putting a stop to something. But adjustments, they are for when we want to stay in connection. Adjustments are gentle, they are kind, and they're fluid. So imagine a yoga teacher just gently moving you into the correct pose. The adjustment is millimeters. It's not tough or harsh, but it's a gentle, you're on the right track. Let me just... So sometimes we have to adjust a little bit more, like, sitting in a chair and adjusting our position. Again, it's done with love for the greater good. We can adjust ourselves when we realize that we are a little bit off, I do this often with my words. I'll start a sentence and then I'll go back again to replace a word with a more appropriate word. Or if I catch myself thinking a thought that isn't very kind or loving to myself, I actually say to myself, no, wait, I didn't mean that. What I meant was, and then I replace it with something that's more compassionate. So we can also, like we adjust ourselves, we can also adjust others, verbally or non-verbally, for example, by, moving someone's hand. So when we adjust someone verbally, it's about how we choose to communicate with them. Communication. I cannot say this enough, but communication is so important, and it's so beautiful also. The more that we're willing to communicate our needs and desires, the easier it also is to make adjustments. So healthy, loving, and clean boundaries are about creating win-win situations. Situations where everyone feels safe, secure, and where they feel that they can actually win. An adjustment is not about punishing or retaliating. No, it's about expressing love for ourselves and teaching others how to love us even better. Communication is really difficult for many people, though, because we're not really taught how to communicate in ways that are clear and vulnerable. Instead, a lot of communication is laced with blame and critique and victim consciousness, drama, reactivity, threats, innuendos, half truths, white lies, outright lies, bravado, basically everything but clarity and vulnerability. So, a good way to practice communication, ideally clear and vulnerable communication, is by checking in with yourself and with others. You can check in with yourself and then say something like, right now I'm feeling, or this is how I'm interpreting what you're saying, and that is making me feel. Notice how I said, this is how I'm interpreting. I did not say, you are making me feel. It's about taking responsibility for your interpretations, your stories, your filter, your expectations, your feelings, your fears, or whatever it might be. So we can follow that up with what I would like is, or what I need is. But again, the other person gets to choose whether they actually want to give that. It's not an expectation. It's not law. So you can also check in with the other person as to where they're at, what their needs or what their feelings are, and so on. Again, this is an art. It's about tuning into what feels true in the moment. It's not something that I think too much about, but rather I do intuitively. I will say things like, what do you need right now? If a friend has come to me and shared an issue or their feelings. In other situations, I may say, I'm sensing this. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Or, I would like to do this. How do you feel about that? Checking in is about deepening the connection, making it even more true, making it even better. It's about being curious and open, and again, fluid. So many people, they mistake boundaries and self-care for being selfish. I would like to bust this myth once and for all. If you do not take care of yourself, and you either give and don't get back in ways that feel sufficiently nourishing, or you feel resentful or frustrated, you're a rescuer or a victim, probably both. It is your job. It's your responsibility to take care of yourself. Setting time aside to take care of your mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual health is your responsibility. It's your purpose. So once your cup is full and it's overflowing, you will naturally have an abundance of love and energy. And you will find yourself naturally overflowing and pouring into the cups of others. But until then, focus on you. This is the true magic of self-care and self-healing and putting yourself first. That once you have and you've done the work, it will come naturally to give to others. So sure, in the short term, self-care and putting yourself first may only serve you. And yes, it may even be selfish, but in the long term, it will benefit the world. So can you actually feel that difference? Self-care and self-love are not bubble baths and burgers and beer and face masks. No, that's called treating yourself. And yes, that has its time and it has its place. But here, we're talking about emotional self-care. Good boundaries are emotional, and emotional self-care is about saying no to things that cause you unreasonable stress or anxiety or worry or pain. It's about not tolerating lies or being disrespected. It's not being the rescuer and the savior to somebody's victim, and not pursuing someone who's indirectly or directly rejected you or isn't making the effort, meeting your needs, or breadcrumbing you, and so on. It's not tolerating controlling behavior or abusive behavior. So then you speak up, you set boundaries, you leave. It's about not tolerating gaslighting. Trust your own experience, your truth, and your reality. And it's making sure that your emotional needs and feelings of safety and security are being met, are being taken care of. So I want you to ask yourself, what are my emotional boundaries? And where do I need to work on them? Now, the same thing applies to physical boundaries. What do I physically need to feel good, healthy, and happy? One example, it's a very specific example, but one example I see and hear about really often is how people override their boundaries when it comes to physical intimacy, kissing, touching, sex, etc., before they're actually ready, or doing things that they would rather not, hoping that it's going to be over quickly. So many people, women especially, use physical intimacy to try to create a bond and emotional intimacy as a way to secure a form of connection, attachment. But not only is this deceiving yourself, it also often backfires because it's an illusion that while you can rush physical intimacy, you can't actually rush emotional intimacy and emotional security. And just because someone has had sex with you doesn't mean that more will come from it. There's no guarantee. So it's a false sense of security, which sadly often only leads to heartbreak and disappointments. So if you truly desire an emotional connection and emotional intimacy, then honor this. This is not the same as physical intimacy. And yes, I know, carnal desires. You also have physical needs, but really ask yourself, what's my true desire? What's the deeper desire? Is it to scratch this sexual itch that I have right now? Or is it for emotional well-being, safety, security, connection? Not investing my heart before I know, as much as we can ever know, that this is a good investment for me. This is what it means to take care of yourself. And sometimes the physical boundary that you have to place is a lot more with yourself than it is with the person that you're with. So if I have said that I want to wait to have sex till I know that there's a form of commitment between us, it's my job to honor that and to not change that boundary just before because I'm suddenly overcome by lust and desire. Or maybe that's precisely what I choose to do as a sovereign, self-aware, and self-responsible adult. You can do whatever you please, but your choices are also your consequences. So examine your physical boundaries with others, with the world, and also with yourself. Do you take care of yourself the way that you desire? Food, exercise, movement, healing, health. Look at all of these aspects and ask yourself, what are my physical boundaries? And where do I need to work on them? Equally, it's your job to protect your energy. So different practices exist for protecting your energy field, and this is not my area of expertise. Now, as I said, I personally resonate with water, so I imagine a waterfall when I need to, surrounding me and protecting my field. Water is healing, water is cleansing. It can be gentle, so you can easily pass through it, and it cleanses your field as you enter into my field. But water can also be this hard barrier where nothing can penetrate, nothing can pass through. So I will also use physical showers to wash off energy that's not mine or that doesn't serve me. Showers, washing my hands, or even just drinking water with the intention of cleansing and protecting myself. But like I said, There are many, many ways to protect your energy. So I want you to play around with whatever might work for you specifically. Visualizations, tuning into your heart, using materials, it's up to you. So I always try to have an awareness of how much energy gets poured out and left in different places and with different people. So if I feel depleted, it could be that I have given a little bit too much of my energy or left a little bit too much behind. So I try to be mindful and to tune in regularly, but it happens that I don't realize it until later. And then I just take a few calming breaths and I ground myself into the now, into my body, and then I call my energy back into myself. Again, play around with what might work for you specifically. Energy is a really, really big concept. And part of energetic mastery and alchemy is finding ways to be in relationship with your own energy and the energy of others. Other people will try to impose their energy on you or try to take your energy. We're energy beings, and energy exchange is perfectly normal and perfectly natural, but it's your responsibility to place the appropriate boundaries and to take care of yourself. So I want you to ask yourself, what are my energetic boundaries? And are they as good as I would like them to be? Where do I need to work on them? Again, you do the best that you can. Every day we learn. We learn something new about ourselves, and what was okay yesterday may not be okay today. Or something that did not feel good yesterday may feel good today. The important thing is learning and adjusting. Healthy and clean boundaries and boundary work boils down to that. Learning and adjusting, not taking things personally, but rather choosing to learn from life. Where were my boundaries too loose and too leaky? Where did I have a blind spot? What changed there? Was my boundary too rigid? Can I be more fluid, surrendered, and playful? Ultimately, it's about dancing with life. Sometimes we tense the body and sometimes we relax. This is the art, but taking full responsibility for the dance that is life. So here are some healthy and clean examples of saying no. Sounds nice, but I'm not available. Or I'm honored that you asked me, but I can't do it. I'm sorry, I can't help you at this time. Unfortunately, it's not a good time right now. I'm not available at the moment. Unfortunately, this is something that I can't do right now. I really appreciate you asking, but I can't commit to that right now. Unfortunately, I can't make it. Thanks for thinking of me, but I can't. No, thanks. Now, which one do you feel works the best for you? Go on. I want you to give it a try in front of the mirror and see, because the more that you practice, the easier it becomes. And remember, the word no is also a full sentence. You don't need to add anything. No apology, no explanations, and no justifications are actually necessary. So knowing and placing and honoring boundaries is such a tricky subject, and we are bound to run into boundary problems. I mean, occasionally we're bound to. So this doesn't need to be made into a bigger problem than it actually is. If both parties involved are willing and open for communication, the issue can be resolved really easily, and you can learn and you can grow from it. So the first thing to do is to identify the symptom. Look at your life and the situation and identify where the boundary problem exists. If you've never examined your boundaries before, now is the time to have a look at each area of your life and identify if there is a boundary problem. Look at your relationships, your parents, your friends, your colleagues, at your work, and your relationships with yourself. Examine each area of your life to become really clear about your relationship with the various boundaries, your health, your food, your money, your time, your energy. Then the next thing to do is to identify the conflict. Are you taking responsibility for another person rather than being responsible to them? Being responsible for another person is taking their stuff on as your own. It's rescuing behavior. Now, being responsible to another is treating them like the sovereign being that they are. They are responsible for themselves, but you can still be supportive and nurturing. Are you passive or reactive towards them and the conflict? Or are you being responsible for your part of it? Then you identify the need that drives the conflict. People don't act in inappropriate ways for no reason. So we're often trying to meet some underlying need that our family, that our history did not meet. So when we cross the boundary or when we allow someone else to cross our boundary, it's usually because we have a fear and or a need. So let's say that you are too afraid to say no to someone for fear that they're going to stop talking to you. The need underneath the fear is to stay in connection, but you crave love and intimacy. So ask yourself if this is the right way to get that love and that intimacy. Ask yourself if you are willing to pay this price, if it's right for you to have to pay this price. Is there another way? A way where you honor yourself? Then comes consequences. Ask yourself if you fail to enforce consequences. Consequences for someone crossing your boundary, or consequences if someone tries to make you responsible for them and for their life. Do you end up paying for another person's behavior? Without a consequence, your boundaries don't actually matter. I'm going to say that again. Without a consequence, your boundaries don't actually matter. And if you're not willing to enforce the consequence, then the boundary really doesn't matter. Boundaries only matter if you are willing to enforce consequences. Otherwise, it's just empty talk and threats. Boundaries are about respect, respecting yourself, honoring yourself. If you don't walk away from a situation that's doing you harm or enforce your boundaries, ultimately the message that you are sending to yourself, but also to the world, is that you don't matter. And if you don't respect you, how do you expect others and the world to respect you? Then it's about responding and not reacting. If you find yourself reacting to something that someone says or does, you may have a problem with boundaries. Because if someone is able to cause havoc inside of you by doing or by saying something, or not doing or saying something, that person is in control of you at that point, and your boundaries are lost. You're in reaction mode. So instead, when you're able to ground yourself, you can choose how you respond. Responding means that you have choice. You are in control. While a reaction is more of a knee-jerk response, it's unconscious. So being reactive means that you have no control over your own behavior. It's not enough to just understand our needs, but we also have to get them met. You have to identify what the need is so that it can be met in healthy ways. instead of ways that end up controlling you or hurting you. This is where belief work comes in. Identify what the needs are and what needs to happen for that need to be met. As you begin to do this work and set your boundaries, know that your boundary skills are still really fragile and new. So you can't immediately take them into a difficult situation. It's a muscle that has to grow, and it grows over time and with practice. Some boundaries are just easier to place than others. So I like to say that you have a whale. We all have a whale, the one big one. The one that you know is painful and difficult for you, the one where you always collapse and lose yourself. It may be a relationship with a parent, maybe a situation that carries a lot of fear and tension for you. Whatever it is, this is your whale. This is not the first place to practice your new skills. Instead, practice with the little fish. Practice placing your boundaries and your new skills in situations and with people you know will honor and respect you. Practice in places where you know that your no will be encouraged and received. With time, you can work your way up to your whale, but start with the little fish. And in addition to practicing new skills and safe situations, it's time to avoid hurtful situations. Say no to the bad. When you think that you are ready to reestablish a relationship with someone who's been abusive or controlling in the past, bring a friend or a supporter along. And also be really aware of your pull towards hurtful situations and the pull towards painful relationships. Be really careful not to get sucked into the drama and any painful situations again, because of a strong wish for reconciliation or love or connection or intimacy. This is again a reason why people are willing to accept less than what they truly desire. So many people have the misconception that by placing boundaries, the love has to end. Now, this isn't true at all. Healthy boundaries allow us to love in freedom, not from guilt. Boundaries allow everyone to be sovereign and responsible for themselves. So placing boundaries in no way means to stop loving. Instead, it actually means you are gaining more freedom to love. There's more safety and security. So as people begin to take this work and do this work, they might fall into the trap of thinking that doing someone a favor is having bad boundaries or is enabling codependent and victim behavior. This isn't true. When you freely choose to do something good for another person, you're actually enhancing your boundary. Doing something out of guilt or fear, that is what's problematic. But doing something because it truly feels like the true thing to do, also for them, is healthy and is ultimately what life is actually about. So I want to give you some examples of sharing how you are feeling without blaming or criticizing. When I see you talking to another man, woman, I feel jealous and insecure. Now, this is an observation of your own feeling state that you are sharing with your partner. You're not judging your partner's behavior as good or as bad, nor are you judging your own feelings. You're just simply stating an observation that you've made about your response to a specific situation. You're stating a fact without making it personal. Then you might say, would you be willing to bring me into the conversation with them? Now, this is a request. It's a concrete action that you would like taken, that you share clearly, but without making a demand. Now, your partner can choose to accept this request or not. And depending on what they do, you then have to evaluate your next action from there. So you can express observations, feelings, needs, and requests in this manner. when I see, hear, remember, etc., I feel ... something, 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 because I need what I would like instead, or would you be willing to? Now, you can also receive another person without hearing blame or criticism. In this case, your partner might respond with something like, so when you see me talking to another man or woman, you feel jealous and insecure. You need to feel included in my life. Would you like me to introduce you to them and bring you into our conversations? This form of communication is actually derived out of nonviolent communication. So it may seem quite sterile. And yes, okay, it is, but it works, and it can really help calm down a heated conversation. And it can help you get your needs and your points across clearly without too much damage. So when expressing boundaries and needs, it's a good way to weave this form of communication in. And of course, once you're comfortable and familiar with this kind of method, you can play around with it a lot more, make it more your own, make it feel more natural. Setting boundaries is not about reacting in an overt defensive way. It's about responding from a clear vision of reality. So having clear boundaries simply means that we are very aware of what is our business and what's not. Having good boundaries means that we understand that we are not responsible for the perception of others. We're responsible only for our own perceptions and for our well-being, getting our needs met. We stay committed to taking care of ourselves and leave others to tend to their own business, to take care of themselves. So we innately know what is appropriate, and we create boundaries and we respond accordingly. When we take responsibility for ourselves, we not only feel better, but the quality of our interaction with others also improves dramatically. Sometimes taking care of ourselves means saying no. Saying no can be the kindest thing that we can do for ourselves and for others. And saying yes when we need to say no is actually a form of rescuing others, and it inevitably leads to self-violation and to resentments. So this work, emotional and energetic alchemy and mastery, is about learning to take better and better and better and better care of ourselves. We keep learning, we keep adjusting, we keep evolving and growing. And as we do, our life and our relationships also become better and better and better.